Hi, everyone. Welcome to our latest episode of Lowdown on Low Code. And this is one I've been waiting a long time to do because Clay Richardson is in the house. Clay, who invented the term low code?
According to Wikipedia, John Rymer and Clay Richardson, but I do get tomatoes thrown at me every once in a while.
Yeah. Well, get over it, people, right? Clay and I did come up with the term low code after having done lots and lots of interviews. Clay, remember we got together, I think it was at a conference, and we started talking about some of the new development approaches and platforms we were seeing. Clay, I was coming from the world of Java and .NET, and Clay was coming from the world of BPM, like capital BPM.
Back in the day.
And, yeah. And we just started to see these products that, A, they were much faster to develop apps, and B, you could start small with a financial investment and grow from there, and even start small with a project and prove out an idea and then go from there. And Clay, you remember the debate we had? Was it going to be no code or low code?
Yeah. It's funny because I remember part of that conversation we had that launched the research was actually also me complaining about a particular vendor in my space that starts with the letter P, and just complaining that they always win these ways, but they're hard as hell to use, right? And part of that conversation spun into there has to be a better way to get results faster, right?
Yep.
Without this big uplift. And so when we started doing this research, it really came down to, new platforms that get you to the outcomes without the 12-month ramp up, right? Yeah. Or having to have developers. So it was a really good conversation.
Yeah. Well, Clay, I'm going to ask you to tell folks what you're doing, what you're up to these days. But first,
yeah,
Andy Bartels is with us, and this is another part of this conversation I love because Andy just brings. We're going to have a conversation about metrics and how you actually get value out of these products. And Andy just has done so much work on that, and the combination of you two guys is you're like a dream team. So Andy, really happy to have you here with us.
Happy to be here and happy to be with my friend Clay.
Yeah. So Clay, you and I worked at Forrester, and that's when we did this low code research. But then you've moved on. Tell us a little bit more about Digital FastForward. What you're doing now?
Yeah, actually, a lot of what I'm doing at Digital FastForward was sparked by my time working with you, working with Andy at Forrester, where we saw so many clients trying to translate their strategy into actual outcomes. Executing on these platforms. And so I wanted to get back into we say consulting world, but I would say more of that strategic advisor that's working alongside the client to get them to the results. And so Digital FastForward, a lot of the work that I do now is really around working with executives, helping them figure out their strategy around new technology investments, but then bringing my team to work alongside their team to translate that into actual applications that get the results. So it's really a strategy to outcomes model, but we don't consider ourselves to be a system integrator in the sense that our job isn't actually to do all of the work for you. It's really to work alongside you and build your capability to carry it forward. So it's a little bit of a different model, but I've found it to be very rewarding to see the strategy done and then see the results of what they get, right?
Absolutely.
So that's Digital FastForward. Yep.
And there is a particular vendor that you do a lot of work with, right?
Yeah, it's really interesting. Yeah. So the work we do can cut across multiple vendors, but we found that in particular, Pega is where we do most of our work and the strongest partnership we have, because Pega is an expensive platform. There's no way to slice it, but it can also get big results. And so we just find executives really struggle the most with Pega in the intelligent automation space to get the alignment right around the value and then have a team that has deep expertise to help them get the results. So we've just found that partnership with Pega makes the most sense for us and clients that we help.
Yep. So you've mentioned value, and you've mentioned time to value, time to to deliver. Are these the big issues that you're seeing out in the marketplace?
Yes, actually, it's really interesting. We've looked, I mean, the term time to value is overused, right? Like every software vendor, every services company talks about time to value. The problem is, what we're finding is companies are struggling with quantifying the value, right? And how do I know the value? I mean, Andy, like I think when I left Forrester, I was very jaded on TEIs, right? I'd done too many TEIs to the point where I was just like, you're wasting your time with TEIs, because at the end of the day, you're going to get the investment. And this is a ROI study, the Forrester's methodology for ROI study, total economic impact. But the challenge that I started seeing after I left Forrester is the ROI always gets the investment, but organizations never go back or rarely go back and benchmark. Did we get the value, right? And so we're seeing this where companies are basically saying, well, maybe I need to get rid of Pega or Salesforce or whoever because they haven't seen the value, right? And they're saying this in their language. But part of the problem, and this is the real problem, John, in my mind, is it's not that they're not seeing the value, they're not tracking or benchmarking.
Yes.
That's a bigger issue in my mind. Is if you spend,
Clay, I'm interested at the outset. So you're going in and helping them implement a strategy. Do they even do a good job of setting expectations for the value, setting goals and targets at the outset, or do they kind of, not? It's very vague and they don't really know what they're targeting.
And I know we're not supposed to talk over each other. We're analysts, so right. Sorry. And I think, Andy, you can speak to this too, right? I think companies do a great job of the business case and getting very clear on what they want. And like if you're going to spend, over a 3-year period, you're asking your CIO or executive team to spend maybe $30 million on a piece of software, right? With the implementation, everything. And I think teams get very sharp on what the outcomes are for the most part, right? But where I see the reality of it is once I had the overused Mike Tyson quote, everybody has a plan until you get punched in the teeth, I think is literally in the mouth. Yeah. But I'm sure, Andy, you see this, teams doing a pretty good job of getting the business case together, but not really having a good handle on how are we going to execute to get to the outcome that we want.
Andy, you see this? You've seen this over the years?
My experience has been much more with packaged apps, things like procurement, sourcing, contract lifecycle management, et cetera, because that's where I came out of that, covered through that space. But what you mentioned, John, I think is really critical. A lot of companies, as they're putting together their plans, they kind of have certain goals, but they don't go back and see what fell short. And in many cases, what fell short was the basic thing, oh, gee, we never actually trained the employees who are supposed to use this. Right. We never got the documentation that was supposed to go into the system actually into the system. We never figured out a way of correcting for the errors that arose. So you ended up with partial success, but not anything close to full success, because they didn't discipline themselves to go back and look what we were expecting to get and what did we actually get and where's the gap and how do we close it.
And how do we get what we're hoping to get, right?
Yeah. Well, the how to get it is not necessarily that hard. It's the measuring of it, which is the thing, because the measuring will tell you where you missed.
Right.
And the measuring will then say, okay, here's what you need to now do to focus on getting that closure. Yes, you're right. You still have you actually get people to make the changes. But it's when you get a clear sense, okay, we didn't train our employees. We didn't train on how to use it. We didn't train them how to import or how to get out of it. Oh, so, okay, there's the pathway. Now we still have to train them.
Right.
We know what to do to close that gap and around that. So, training is so important. And then the other parts of it, the adjoining processes that don't get adapted. If we get through the process, we get an outcome, the outcome drops on the floor.
Yeah.
Because we didn't hand it over to the next piece that needed that.
Right.
And
That's
so now
like
we have to say, okay, how do we get that output from this process into or connected to the next process that may need it? How do we correct when it's got errors that need to be rectified?
So how do we approach this problem of metrics? Because it sounds like it's not easy that you're getting into not just a business case, but more granular metrics. I mean, Clay, maybe start with you. Have you developed ideas about how to help folks with that?
Yeah, and I think part of the challenge, going to what Andy was saying, part of the challenge here is, and we stumbled across this working with clients over the last 2 or 3 years, is when we do ROI studies and we try to use that ROI to go back and benchmark, it just takes too long, right? The ROI, like if you think Forrester style ROI or TEI, it takes a while just to go back and benchmark everything. So nobody really wants to do it, right? And what we found, what I've started doing, and my team has started doing, is we actually create something called a value scorecard, which is high-level value drivers connected to current, where are we with these value drivers, and future, where are we trying to go? So give you an example, client we're working with, where this is for a bank. We basically put together a value scorecard around them leveraging Pega real-time decisioning, right? So Pega's customer decision hub is what it's called. And so when we put the metrics together, we were able to say, okay, these are the 5 value drivers around how are you going to get value out of this capability. You're going to be able to reduce the time it takes to actually make an offer to a caller. You're also going to be able to increase the number of offers made. But most importantly, you're going to be able to get uplift on the amount of offers accepted that takes you from a $10 million uplift on offers to $150 million, right? And again, these are numbers, they sound psycho, right? Like, you mean we can go 10x? These are numbers that the business is putting together that go into a business scorecard, that there's a person in the business that signed off on, this is real. It's not, DFF, my firm in there telling them this is what's possible. It's them saying it's possible, us pressure testing it. But now you have a very tight value scorecard that the CEO is looking at, CIO is looking at, and every quarter, now we can go and benchmark and say, did these metrics get hit? Why did they not? Do we need to adjust, right? And so that's a very simple conversation, as opposed to the ROI, redoing the ROI every quarter is not realistic. And so we just tried to simplify that model to get everybody in the conversation, because we can show the scorecard to the people on the front line and say, hey, this is what we're doing. We can show the scorecard to the CEO, he can buy into it. And so it's just super simple way. But the other part is the quarterly baselining or benchmarking. Right. Every quarter, how have we done with this? How have we done? And so that gets people accountable too, right? But it's that simplicity is important, right?
Right. Simplicity and it's practical, it's pragmatic to update it every quarter. I mean, that's an important piece of this too, right?
But we get pushback even on the quarterly update, because people are like, well, we haven't been doing enough. Or if let's say we're working with a new client and they're looking at it saying, well, we haven't even released our first, MVP or first go live. And we're saying, well, still, you want to be tracking and having everybody see what's the expectation. That first go live isn't going to deliver value until maybe a quarter, 2, 3 later. But every quarter, you want to build that muscle for value, right?
Right.
So,
right.
Yeah.
Andy, this reminds me of your distinction between investments made
Efficiency.
for efficiency and investments made for effectiveness.
Exactly.
Uplift is effectiveness. It's not we're going to cut headcount.
Right.
Is that often overlooked?
I think absolutely. Now, Clay, I think this occurred before you, after you left Forrester, because it's really in the last few years that I was at Forrester. But I was developing this notion that so much of technology investment has traditionally been measured on efficiency. How many fewer heads can we have to do a particular task, reducing the cost of inputs, the amount of inputs on it. And it's often been sold that way.
Yeah.
But that doesn't necessarily deliver a lot of value.
Right.
The more important goal is to look at the outcomes. How good a job are we at achieving the desired outcomes? That's what we call effectiveness measures, where you're looking not at inputs, you're looking at outputs. Now, the tricky thing is, what you're trying to do is take a frequency of outputs or outcomes that are undesirable and reduce that, or the frequency of desired outcomes that are too low, you want to increase. That means you've got to measure what is the frequency of a bad loan decision? What is the frequency of a lost customer? What is the frequency of a mistake in underwriting? Or any of the other outcome mistakes that you make? What is that? So that we can see how we're shifting that and what's the cause of that. So measuring efficiency is easier. So most companies focus on that, most vendors focus on that. Measuring effectiveness is harder because it involves a fair amount of pre and post comparisons. But it's the real way to get the desired outcomes, because what you want is not a highly efficient system that doesn't do what you want. What you want is an efficient system that is effective in delivering the outcomes you want. You want to focus on the outcomes and how do you get there. And so tricky. It's definitely hard to do. And the type of discipline you're talking about in your practice provides a roadmap for how companies can think about how do we get those effectiveness metrics? How do we get the desired outcomes we want to? And to your point, Clay, it is down the road.
Yeah.
It's not going to happen right out of the box. And so it's a matter of getting executives to understand, look, we're investing in this particular technology, whether it's a low-code deployment, whether it's an app, to achieve certain outcomes. Let's define what those outcomes are. Let's define what good looks like.
Right.
And then define how we're going to get there, and be patient and understand we're not going to get overnight.
Clay, this sounds like it's aligned with how you're addressing it.
It's interesting, though, that I know people probably listening like, okay, analysts agreeing, right? Like, what is that about, right? But I will say, like, it's a struggle to have this conversation with clients, right? Because I had a conversation, this is just last week, where, my feedback to this group of executives was, stop thinking about the cost at this point, right? Like, the cost is not the problem. The problem is you're so focused on efficiency and all of this stuff where that's never going to get you a real return. I think ultimately that's where companies, and I ran into this, Andy, early on when I left Forrester, was I was helping teams build these business cases, and coming right out of Forrester, it's all about efficiency, right? Like at that time, it was still intelligent automation, digital process automation was all about efficiency. And I just remember one of the first business cases I did out of Forrester, and it was like, okay, so how many heads are we going to cut? Like, and I said, look, I can get you the savings. What I can't do is cut your people. Like, that's not, I'm not given permission to do that. So I can guarantee that you'll be able to get improvements in how your process is going, but I can't fire your people. Right. And I think what we've done, because that was such a weird sort of conversation, I want to own with you the value, but I can't own that part of the value, right? What I can own is actually how do you better serve your clients? How many more clients can you get, right? What are those types of outcomes that you're looking for that are meaningful, that if you decide to let people go, that's your decision. But the partnership I want to have with you is always on, again, like you were saying, Andy, how much more can you bring in terms of commercial loans?
Yeah.
Because you're doing a better job of qualifying
Yes.
the loans and weeding out the bad risk, right? That's where I get most excited. And really, when we build business cases now, I'll be honest with you, I will attach a business case. We will only focus on business cases and clients where they're on board with intelligent automation by itself is not going to get you your outcome.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So now if we're talking about an insurance business saying, hey, we want to grow our, revenue by 30% in a particular line of business, I'm on board with that, because then we're talking about a big number. That might be a $300 million improvement, right? Like, we want to sign up for that, where we know BPM can have, or BPM, you got me saying BPM, John, intelligent automation can have an impact on that. But I don't want to just say, and I think this is still the mistake that people are making, Andy, is they'll say, all right, we want to make sure we're identifying the benefits that the platform alone will deliver to us. And it's like that doesn't even exist anymore.
Right.
Right.
The platform by itself. So you want to trace every dollar of benefit directly back to the platform by itself.
Not going to work.
No.
But you still have executives that they ask me that question, like, okay, so how do we think about Pega and the direct benefits Pega provides? Because that's how I need to justify my costs.
Well, part of that, I wonder if part of that is that some of the platforms deals are really big.
Yeah.
You mentioned, $20-30 million in software, and I wonder if that sort of leads people to say, well, that platform better pay off, and they ignore all the other things around it that are actually going to produce the payback.
Yeah, and I want to be careful, because Pega will shoot me if somebody says 30-40 million, and that's the total 3-year run on service.
Yeah. I'm talking about some of the
yeah. I got it.
I'm referring obliquely to some of the large enterprise deals that go on.
Yeah, but they are that size. I mean, that's the investment profile, right?
Yeah. Hey, I want to shift a bit to the other topic that you raised, Clay, which is accelerating delivery.
Yeah.
You mentioned some people are reluctant to do a quarterly review. We haven't really gotten to MVP, minimum viable product yet, or we haven't, so obviously, the sooner they start to be able to measure progress against goals, the happier they're going to be. How do you, first of all, what slows them down? And then how do you help them? How do you help them move faster?
I think there's a couple of things that slow teams down. I think first, vendors sometimes will focus on big bang, right? Like, we're going to do a 3-year run and we're going to roll this out, and it's going to be this big thing. I actually just talked to someone, a leader, where they just went through that 3-year rollout, was a big bang, spent a bunch of money, millions, but really just got a small fraction of what they were hoping to get done in that 3-year period, right? And so our thing is always, and I think this is just a good best practice, is like, how do you break it up in a way that you get the value, at least the down payment on the value, in that first 3 to 6 month cycle?
Yeah.
Right? Because you're going to learn so much. I think this is, if you remember, Andy, we did this, we partnered on this paper a long time ago, The New Economics of Failure, right? Which I thought was the greatest title. But the whole idea there was like, you need to move fast so you can learn fast. There's actually dollars in terms of the value you get in terms of being able to learn quickly and put something out in a short period of time. But I think what we've also found is that's really important is the solution design, like going from strategy quickly to solution design, where you say, okay, what can we do in 3 months that begins to validate some of the core ideas, right? And the beautiful part about that is not only can you get validation to say, what is it that we're building and is the value really there? But you also get to invest incrementally, right? So instead of like some clients, when they buy a piece of software like Pega Intelligent Automation, they buy what they think they're going to, where they think they're going to be at in 3 years, right?
Mhm.
What all they think they're going to be done. And vendors are really good at this. Like, we're going to give you an all-you-can-eat license. You can do whatever, but at the end of the 3 years, guess what? You're going to be locked in at wherever you were. So if you go over after that 3 years, you're hosed, right? And so what ends up happening in those scenarios is they try to build as if they're going to go live in 3 years. And it's like, no. If I'm advising you on license, I would say get a small enough license for your first year that you can begin to prove some things out, right? And then you have a better idea of where you're really going to be. But getting a locked in on a 3-year license, which is, it sounds weird, but cloud, you'd think people wouldn't be doing this. I don't know, Andy, you're probably the license guy. I don't quite understand the 3-year license thing, right? But it's really, how do you start to invest incrementally, get the return, and then scale based on your confidence going up, right?
I want to remind you, Clay, that this was one of the first things that we learned in that initial research. And we started to say, test and learn.
Test and learn, exactly.
Test the business idea.
Yep.
And learn if it's actually going to be useful.
Yep.
And then you go on from there. Andy, license. Any comments?
Well, let me come to the license in a moment. But I think one of the parts of this, which is implicit, but I want to make explicit, is employee engagement.
Right.
In other words, rather than presenting this as, okay, we in tech are going to develop this, we're going to hand it over to you, and you're going to run it. And oh, by the way, we're going to eliminate 30% of your jobs. That's not a particularly positive way to do it. Instead, your starting point needs to involve not all employees, but a select set of employees who are in the line, who know what the problems are, who know what you're trying to get at, to know and have at least ideas as to how do we get those outcomes we want. What are the stumbling blocks? What are the barriers that we need to overcome? And then how can we use the technology to do that?
Yeah.
And that also is what then can set up milestones along the way in which you're able to prove, okay, we've been piloting this with a small group of employees in this area. And they've been giving us a whole lot of ideas as to how we should tweak it and configure it and get it to work. And we're starting to get results which we can then measure and show. And then the employees themselves become, in effect, the internal salespeople who go to their friends and say, hey, we've been using this. It's really helping us do our job. It's not threatening. It's actually empowering us. It's allowing us to get better results, which is what we all want. Yeah. And if we get better results, guess what? We've got more jobs for all of us. So the employee involvement at that level is so critical from the very early stage. It shouldn't be viewed as an IT project. It should be viewed as a partnership between people in technology, IT, and people in the line. And the people in line really much viewed as contributors.
Yeah.
As those who know what the problems are and know what are the bottlenecks and how can we use technology to get past those. That's so critical to make this work. And it's implicit in so much of what you were saying, but I want to bring it out.
Before we even get into license, Andy, I think you're calling it right, is I almost feel like sometimes my role is as a therapist between the business and IT, right? Yeah. And I've been called in specifically in scenarios where the IT has already started building an application for the business with no business involvement or input, like literally brought in as a mediator, because the head of the business unit is basically like, you're telling IT, you're building what for me? Like you haven't even gotten me involved. And so we've gotten to a point now where I I have to remind my team of this when we're delivering, like when we bring our acceleration team, our delivery team, and they're building an application after we've done strategy. I have to remind them that the business is always in the driver's seat. It's the business building the application. You just happen to be the hands that are being directed, right? And it's kind of a harsh thing, but even now we will actually, at the end of every sprint cycle, if we're doing the implementation work, we'll actually ask the business. We'll do a Mentimeter real-time survey where we ask the business and the business stakeholders, one, was the business in the driver's seat for the entire sprint, right? The business stakeholders, the employees that are in the line answer that. And then my team is also answering that. And then the client's IT team is answering it, right? So we're really wanting to make sure everybody gets that, right? Like it's not your, I think this is a big thing I learned at Forrester, honestly, is like, and I come from development, by the way, like I'm a developer, was a developer at heart. They don't let me touch a keyboard now. But the biggest thing I learned is a lot of times developers and development team have empathy for the application they're building, right? They have more empathy for the application they're building. I say they, but I'm just as guilty. We have more empathy for the application we're building than the people that will use the application. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the flip I learned at Forrester, was like, wait a minute, you actually have to have more empathy and understand that the person using this application is impacting their life probably more than what you're building is impacting yours, because they have to use this day to day. And so you're right, bring that to the top is so essential. And when we see teams doing that, it actually works really nicely because things move faster. You have champions. They don't feel like the technology is being sicked on them, right? They feel like they own it, right? And I think somebody was joking with me about a lot of the stuff that we did while at Forrester, like business technology and some of the terminology. But the thing I realized after leaving Forrester is like people still are struggling to adopt things that I think I take for granted, right? That you take for granted, like in the, I don't want to say real world, but out there, right? People are like, business technology, what does that mean? Why, right? Yeah. So I think that's critical.
So I think I've heard three things. One is a realistic set of metrics that you can track quarterly and that reflects business outcomes.
Yes.
Start small, break down the problem. Don't try to solve a 3-year problem. Just break it down, and then put the business in charge. Will those accelerate delivery?
I think there's one other piece that is critical. There's one other piece that's really critical that I think a lot of teams overlook or take for granted is just executive alignment. And I know that sounds kind of hokey, but I've just found like a lot of times, especially with intelligent automation, each executive has a different view of what they think it can do. And even after they've gone through it a year or two, they still each have a different kind of view. And I think, just getting executives aligned is powerful. I mean, again, this is kind of me in my tech therapist mode, but it's really getting people into a room and actually saying, now walk me through what your outcomes really look like 3 years from now. I mean, we asked this super simple question, right? And you'd be amazed at how divergent the executives' views are. In 3 years, what does this look like? Even if they have a business case, they have a whole different set of requirements and criteria and And so I think the more you can, from the outset, but on a regular basis, bring, and it should be annual planning, like bring executives back together around, let's make sure we're all on the same page around what we're trying to get to, right? And I think that's one, and I'll just throw this in because I think this is, I'm seeing a lot of this is just what slows things down a lot of times is tech stack confusion, right? Like we have Salesforce, we have Pega, we have ServiceNow. How do I use these? And you have to think behind each one of those names is a whole machine.
Yeah.
Right. And that machine is really saying like, well, we can do all of those things, right? And so I think that really slows down. I think having clarity around, this is sounds like simple stuff, but it's like having clarity around what are we doing with each one of these platforms and making sure everybody's aligned on that. It's, again, sounds easy. I know it's hard actually, but I think that's what can accelerate is just getting that clarity and communicating that from the top, like, hey, very simple. This is what this platform is going to be doing for us. This is what this platform is going to be doing. This is what this platform is going to be doing. I think that helps. Yeah.
So every one of the platforms has a role. Right. Andy, we're running short. We're running down time here. Any final thoughts from your side?
Well, I think that the last thought I want to bring up is the importance of adjusting the goals. In other words, when you start, there may be a set of goals that you're trying to get at. But as you're working through it, you can learn that, oh, no, actually the goals we have are suboptimal. They're in the wrong direction. We need to rethink the goals because what we're learning from this is that's a different set of things we can accomplish. Mm-hmm. And so having that flexibility of the vision to say, look, as we're on a journey here, and the journey doesn't necessarily have a finite fixed endpoint. It's a learning journey. And as we move down this journey, we might learn that, you know what, instead of heading towards, I'll call it the equivalent of San Francisco, we should be actually heading towards the equivalent of LA.
Yeah.
Warmer, more tropical, whatever.
Are you making a judgment call, man?
I'm making a judgment call. But the point is that is to be flexible on your end goals and adjust your end goals based upon what you're learning can be accomplished. Because there could be things you've learned that, gee, we had no idea we could do that at the beginning of it. Or to learn that what we thought was going to be the benefit is actually tangential. The real benefit lies in a different area. And in many cases, it's a different kind of effectiveness metric that you learn is most valuable. So
plus I'm thinking within a 3-year period, your world might change 3 times.
Yes.
Yep.
And
can I ask you a question? Can I ask Andy a question, John?
Sure.
I've been wanting to ask an economist this question. Right? Because I think part of what's driving this kind of intense focus on value is really the shift to cloud in a big way from a licensing standpoint. And I'm seeing it in the Pega world because Pega is making this massive shift to get clients on cloud. But it's that renewal cycle that I'm wondering, is that driving this really intense focus from a client standpoint on value? I haven't seen this before. I'll be honest with you. I don't think I've seen this level of intensity on, like, are we getting value, right? And so I don't know if this cloud is kind of driving this in the intelligent automation space.
I think that, let me just spend a second on what cloud does. I mean, traditional license, you pay, for sake of an argument, $1 million in license. And it's ideally a perpetual license, and you're paying then maintenance typically 20-25% per year. And so the fixed upfront cost. And as a vendor, the goal is to balance the two so that you get that upfront license, which is what gives you revenue now, but then the kicker of maintenance revenue coming down. If you're a SaaS vendor, then your upfront revenue is much less.
Mm-hmm.
Because you're getting, say, typically 1/5, for the sake of argument, in subscription that you would have gotten if you'd done a license. And then you get the other 4/5 over the next 5 years, whatever the time frame is. So that puts an incredible pressure on the vendor to try and get renewals.
Right.
Because if the client cancels after 2 years, you've foregone the revenues that you would have gotten from a license model.
Yeah.
So that that does mean vendors, therefore, have a much greater view on, theoretically, on making sure clients get value from it, because the only way they're going to renew is so they get value from it. But at the same time, they've got little control over how you actually get that value, because that lies not in their hands, it lies in the hands of their partners or of their own help desk people.
Yeah.
Now, what some vendors do is they actually create help desk people, support people, who they embed with the client to make sure that they are continually learning from the client, getting input back into the product, but also coaching the client. Hey, did you notice this function in it that you haven't used? If you used it, it's going to get a lot more. It's buried in the code. But if you turn this on, guess what? You get the good value. So that level of engagement with the client is critical if you want to get that renewal. Do a lot of vendors do it? No, because it's expensive.
Yep,
but the smart vendors recognize that if we're going to get that renewal, we've got to have happy clients. We can't just count on client lock-in. We've got to figure out, how do we get the clients actually trained and coached, and not just the clients, but the SIs who are working with it to do that. So we've got to invest a lot in training. Anyway.
Thank you. We're going to have to leave it there. Sounds like that's a great topic for another show. We should reconvene. Guys, thanks so much. Clay, thanks so much. I agree. This brings back fond memories of all the work we did together. We had a lot of fun, and we learned a lot. Anyway, huge props for you and the work you're doing.
Andy, thanks for motivating me to run too. You see all these. Why do you think I started running? All these weird people that forced me to start running. So thank you.
And Andy, thanks so much for jumping on. Your perspective on this was super helpful. Guys, enjoy. For the audience, hope this was helpful.
Yeah.
And thanks for watching Lowdown on Low Code.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.